This video is about magnificent Andalusian cities. No, I'm not in Spain, I'm in beautiful Saudi Arabia, but thinking deeply about all the beautiful time I've spent in Spain. I want to share with you a lot of the reflections and research I've done on this topic over the years. As many Muslims, I have a great longing and a great awe when I think of al-Andalus. And in fact, I know that many non-Muslims, Jews, Christians, and people of all sorts of backgrounds and faiths, when we think about the Islamic heritage and history of Spain, we think of a time of exceptional civilization, of exceptional culture, and we think of very beautiful, amazing cities. These cities embody and perpetuate to this day a heritage which is deeply inspired by the Quran, the Sunnah, and the Islamic tradition. Obviously, not everything that happened in Islamic al-Andalus or that happens today in Spain is Islamic or harmonized with Islamic rules and ethics. But there's a very beautiful taste that was developed in al-Andalus.
The famous Islamic scholar Ibn Khaldun explains that crafts are customs and colors of civilization, which take generations to refine. In this regard, he described late medieval al-Andalus as comparing favorably to other regions. He wrote, "There we find crafts and their institutions still in existence. They are well established and firmly rooted as far as the things required by the customs of the Spanish cities are concerned. They include, for instance, building, cooking, the various kinds of singing and entertainment, such as instrumental music, string instruments and dancing, the use of carpets in palaces, the construction of well-planned, well-constructed houses, the production of metal and pottery vessels, all kinds of utensils, the giving of banquets and weddings, and all the other crafts required by luxury and luxury customs. One finds that they practice and understand these things better than any other nation. Cities can serve as an excellent showcase for Islamic traditions, as attested by the urban civilization of al-Andalus, whose material legacy continues to attract millions of tourists more than 5 centuries after the end of Muslim rule. Centuries, I should mention, after the reconquest, the Reconquista, or we should say just the conquest of Islamic Spain by Catholic armies coming from the north, who tried to wipe out Islamic civilization, and effectively did for several centuries. And yet today there are Muslims and Jews living in Spain, although they were systematically eliminated for centuries, and the country thrives, the tourism industry thrives, thanks to, in great part, the Islamic heritage. This legacy includes architecture, gardens, arts, crafts, and technology. An important aspect of this material culture is that while it developed highly effective or efficient solutions to functional problems such as irrigation or conservation, it also expressed conceptions of beauty and harmony connected to the sacred sciences like, numerology and sacred geometry. In 711, Tariq ibn Ziyad led an army of Arabs and recently Islamized Amazirs, the initial populations of North Africa, into the Iberian Peninsula, which was under foreign Visigoth rule at the time and amid a civil war. Here are some pictures of my fieldwork, taken from some fieldwork and traveling I did, and crossing over from North Africa and to Gibraltar, The Rock of Gibraltar, of course, is named after Tariq ibn Ziyad. It is Jebel Tariq, the mountain of Tariq ibn Ziyad. It was occupied by the Muslims, and then eventually by the Spanish, and then by the English. The United Kingdom still occupies Gibraltar today. So let's be clear. Tariq ibn Ziyad, right, is a native North African, right, an Amazigh. And he is, he converts to Islam, and in 711 is sent by the governor of the western parts of the Islamic Empire, right, Musa ibn Nusayr. He's sent to take over al-Andalus from the Visigoths. Now we have to understand that the Visigoths, right, their rule was contested in al-Andalus, right, in the Iberian Peninsula. And we have to understand that originally the Visigoths come from much further away from Spain than does Tariq ibn Ziyad. Tariq ibn Ziyad is just across, it's just maybe about 20 kilometers of water separating Tangier and Ceuta and those cities along the northern coast of Africa from the south of Spain. So he's actually, culturally closer to the lands that he's invading. Anyway, with the support of many Iberian Jews and Christians who were hostile to the ruling Germanic Visigoths, Ibn Ziyad was able to defeat King Roderick, right, the Visigoth king, and cross the Pyrenees into Lyon in the south of France within a year. This marked the beginning of 781 years of Muslim rule in southwest Europe, which would end in 1492 with the defeat of the Nasrid dynasty in Granada. Several peoples inhabited the lands Ibn Ziyad conquered, including Hispano-Romans, Celts, Basques, Suebi, and Visigoths. Catholicism coexisted with other faiths, such as Arianism and Judaism. Diverse languages and dialects were spoken, some of which would eventually evolve into modern Spanish and Portuguese. Right? The Spanish language didn't exist at the time that Tariq ibn Ziyad conquered the Iberian Peninsula. Many of these peoples allied themselves with the Muslims or even converted to Islam. Joining this community was presumably desirable to many for both worldly and otherworldly reasons. Naturally, others did not convert and resisted Muslim hegemony for centuries. Yet, over generations, converts and their descendants naturally saw Islam as an indigenous religion practiced by local peoples, just as Christianity had been indigenized centuries before. Don't forget that when the Muslims arrived in the Iberian Peninsula, Christianity had only been there for a few hundred years. And when the Muslims left the Iberian Peninsula, Islam had been in the Iberian Peninsula for 8 centuries. So the civilization, the Islamic civilization, or the civilization led by the ruling Muslims, which flourished in the Iberian Peninsula, was called al-Andalus. It's difficult to overemphasize the magnificent achievements of Andalusian civilization. The late scholar María Rosa Menocal borrows the expression of the medieval Saxon nun Hroswitha, right, who was born around 935 of the Common Era and died around year 1000. Hroswitha described al-Andalus as the ornament of the world, right? And this is also the title of Menocal's book. Menocal vividly depicts a place where Muslims, Christians, and Jews living in harmony produced incredible achievements in urban development, architecture, literature, philosophy, science, medicine, technology, art, and mysticism. Such splendors naturally inspire lyrical descriptions provoking a range of emotions for Muslims and non-Muslims today, until this day. These emotions include nostalgia and awe. Indeed, an aesthetic or even spiritual sensitivity seems most capable of capturing the brilliance of a lost civilization, such as Islamic al-Andalus. However, it is also important to balance poetic accounts of atemporal grandeur with an appreciation for the messier details of history. Between 711 and 1492, the Iberian Peninsula, al-Andalus, experienced enormous political instability. Communities comprising people of diverse ethnicities, classes, and religious affiliations were often torn by conflict, including internal divisions among Muslims. The borders between competing polities were constantly redrawn by war. Muslim and Christian rulers often became allies against polities led by their co-religionists, so Muslims sometimes were allied with Christians against other Muslims. A close look at history reveals that accounts of perpetual interreligious harmony are as oversimplified as those of perpetual war, be it jihad or crusading. In fact, the amazing achievements of Andalusian civilization were probably as much the product of creative conflict as they were of cosmopolitan, tolerant pluralism. In any case, oversimplified celebrations of Andalusian civilization can easily hide ideological biases. For instance, insisting on the Islamic aspect of al-Andalus can lead to neglecting the major contributions of Christians and Jews. Likewise, a Eurocentric bias underlies narratives which celebrate European Islam in the pre-modern period as uniquely advanced and cosmopolitan.
This is not an opportunity to say that al-Andalus or Islamic Spain was any better than other parts of the Islamic world. This is not a sort of competition. There's, just in the Western Islamic world, which is my area of specialization, Islam west of Mecca, so much can be said and will be said by me in other videos and has already been said in many of my writings, right? So much can be said of places like, obviously, Northwest Africa, West Africa, the areas of the Mediterranean, many of the islands, right, which were ruled by Muslims for long periods of time, including Sicily, for example, right? So much can be said. Egypt, right, which is west of Mecca.
Concerning 10th century Cordoba, Menocal writes that it was, she writes, an astonishing place, and descriptions by both contemporaries and later historians suffer from the burden of cataloging its wonders. She writes that these wonders include 900 baths and tens of thousands of shops, as well as hundreds or perhaps thousands of mosques. Right? She also writes about how aqueducts provided the city with running water and the paved streets were properly lit. And she writes admiratively about what she calls the rich web of attitudes about culture and the intellectual opulence, which was symbolized by the hundreds of thousands of books collected in over 70 libraries across the city. She writes, at a time when the largest library in Christian Europe probably held no more than 400 manuscripts. Now, comparisons with Christian Europe, so often made by scholars of Islam, are perhaps unfair. They often fit into a sort of facile reductionist narrative, according to which medieval Europe was living in a dark period of decline during Islam's golden age, only for roles to switch during the Western European Renaissance as Islam began its own decline, from which it has yet to recover. This narrative is both anti-traditional and reductionist. It's a reductionist view of pre-modern Europe and colonial in its reductionist view of Islamic societies in recent centuries. Christians in the past and Muslims today should not be stereotypes, nor their complex experiences of reality reduced to their geopolitical and technological weaknesses. Nevertheless, with these caveats in mind, some generalizations are pertinent when analyzing the long duration of movements in history and world systems. Menocal writes, Cordoba's libraries were a significant benchmark of overall social, not just scholarly, well-being, since they represented a near-perfect crossroads of the material and the intellectual. The sort of libraries built in Cordoba, unseen and unimagined for hundreds of years amid the intellectual spolia of the Roman Empire, ultimately depended on a vigorous trading economy throughout the Mediterranean. While it is true that knowledge and culture, as manifest in libraries, depends on a strong economy, a complex analysis should also recognize that the enthusiasm required for vigorous trading also depends on knowledge, creativity, and even inspiration. Economic development presupposes some motivation related to notions of a good and even beautiful life. Indeed, more than commodities were transported along the routes connecting Cordoba to distant places around the Mediterranean, as well as further into Europe, Africa, and Asia along the routes dominated by Muslims. Ideas, sensibilities, beliefs, and other non-material riches also flowed through these networks. Andalusians understood that international trade is not the only requirement of a strong economy. Drawing on multiple types of knowledge, as a scholar, artist, educator, and poet, the Caribbean Jan Carew writes, "The Moors had been able to create a harmony in the rhythms of life in the city and in the countryside. They dotted the map of al-Andalus with their cities and towns, but they could only do this because the surrounding countryside was kept fertile and productive. With advanced drainage and irrigation systems, reservoirs, aqueducts, sophisticated storage facilities, and efficient marketing, transportation, and trading networks. The Moors also brought the countryside into their cities with fantastic gardens, parks, lush inner courtyards, and a constant supply of pure water. The gardens in Moorish cities, both public and private, were known as paradises, a fitting term to describe these exquisite botanical marvels." Carew continues his description, writing, "Different Moorish cities came to be known for their particular forte. Cordoba for its libraries and collections, Seville for its music and musical instruments, and Toledo as a center of industry and learning." So Carew's description really agrees with the description previously mentioned by Menocal. I've spoken a lot about Gibraltar and Cordoba and a little bit about Seville in this video. And so far, I haven't spoken a lot about perhaps my favorite city in Spain, which is Granada. The reason for this is that I'm going to give you an exclusive video all about Granada, not only because I think it's a beautiful and wonderful city that I really love, but also because it's really important in the history of the modern world, no less. It's an absolutely strategic city to understanding modernity and understanding what's happened to Islam also in the past few centuries. So stay tuned for that video on Granada, coming up soon, inshallah. And in the meantime, like, subscribe, comment, share the love. I love to hear about you. I love to get your reactions. And I hope you've enjoyed this video. Assalamu alaikum.